ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Fight for Our Freedom Radio. And I'm your host, Badbaby. And tonight we are honored to have with us Dr. Betty Martini, and we are going to be talking about aspartame. How are you doing tonight, Dr. Betty?
I'm doing just wonderful, Barry, and I am so glad to be back with you. It's a delight.
Well, it's a delight to have you come back. You always enlighten us, and I've been reading a lot of your emails you've been sending me, and I cannot believe some of the stories of people that are writing you about aspartame.
Oh, I know. And I just got one. I feel so sorry for these people. This one happens to be on sucralose, and they wonder why they all of a sudden got epilepsy and seizures. It just happened that the manufacturer forgot to tell you that it causes headaches and seizures and that it's carcinogenic and heaven knows what all that they hid, because it started out as an insecticide. It's no wonder people are so sick. And they go from aspartame to sucralose, and Dr. James Bowen says, well, then they'll maintain the reactions of aspartame and pick up those from Splenda. It's just terrible that, I know Dr. Caldwell has his detox. Dr. Blaylock wrote what to do if you've used aspartame, but unfortunately so many become chemically hypersensitive like I have, and I never even used aspartame, which shows you how much it's unlabeled in food that you don't know you're getting, and that it's gotten really scary,
Well, why do people trust the FDA, Dr. Betty? I mean, are we too trusting?
Well, first of all, I downgraded, I guess you would say, their name. I always called them the Federal Drugs Allowed folks. I now call them Food and Death Association because they just, in 2000, I just put all the pieces of this little puzzle together. I hope you got the email, and it's on our website now, where 9 scientists in 2009 reported that the FDA was thoroughly broken. And you can go to www.mpwhi.com and read it if you like. And there's the letter and the authentication that they did write this letter. And their point was there's no way to safeguard the public from dangerous drugs. They can't make a decision. If they try to tell somebody, hey, this is poison, they're fired. And so you would think that when there was this admission that Congress would do something for the people, although I can't ever remember Congress doing anything for the people. I can remember Congress doing things for Congress, They get a raise every year, so they make all their little arrangements, with Big Pharma and, the bundling things, but they never do anything for the people, and so people believe that the FDA is there for them. When their own people testified against the FDA, and for instance, first they tried to indict him for fraud, as you know, and then the defense team hired both U.S. prosecutors, and they revoked the petition for approval, and then Don Rumsfeld got involved, and Reagan owed him a favor, and they wrote an executive order making the FDA powerless to sign the revoked petition into law. So this is how it gets, a very quick way of telling you how it gets on the market. But as far as the FDA is concerned, their own chief scientist and toxicologist, Dr. Adrian Gross, went to Congress and said, look, it causes cancer, so it violates the Delaney Amendment. It caused brain tumors. It caused brain cancer. And what do you expect? It breaks down to a brain tumor agent, but it caused a lot of other cancers as well. And he said, so how can you set an allowable dose? In other words, you got a poison that causes cancer, and it's just a matter of when, and it violates the law. It violates the adulteration law, interstate commerce law. You're not supposed to be able to ship anything that's adulterated for sale. So it violated all these laws. They told Congress nobody did a thing. Dr. Verrett testified in '87, and she says, here it is, 1987, aspartame hadn't been proven safe yet, because they couldn't prove it safe, because it was impossible. Like Dr. Blaylock said at a lecture I attended, he said, understand the reactions to aspartame are not allergic. They're toxic like arsenic and cyanide. So if you got arsenic and you're trying to do a study and show it to be safe, you can't do it. So they couldn't do it during that time, and they had two sets of studies. And then when the last of the honest people left the FDA, that was before Reagan put in Don Rumsfeld's friend, Dr. Arthur Hull Hayes, to overrule that, board of inquiry, Jerome Bressler retired. And, I called him up. He didn't know me from Adam. I just said, look, you wrote the Bressler report. You told about the shenanigans. You told about the fraud. And I just want to tell you, since I'm warning people off this poison, I want to thank you for being truthful. Well, then, he told me, he said, but didn't you understand there was something missing in my report? I said, yes. Looked like a bunch of tables and stuff, and we never could find it out. And so he says, but you got to find those two studies. The worst 20% people are using this poison, and nobody knows about these things. Well, then it worried me that I was the only one that would know, so I had Dr. Roberts called him, Dr. Russell Blaylock called him. It took me 8 years to find him. No wonder he was so concerned, was because they were teratology studies showing that it caused neural tube defects and spina bifida and cleft palate, and it has caused autism throughout the whole world. And so before before Jerome Bressler died, and I'd gone up to see him a couple of times, and we gave him back, Wayne Shore did, Mission Possible Chicago, handed him the Bressler report back with what had been removed, and then I added it back on my website. And if you read where I've added it back, you'll notice on FDA stationery, aspartame causes birth defects. And there's, so women are giving birth to babies with ADD, ADHD, Tourette's, autism, and all these horrible things. And the birth defects have become so prevalent that you see it in reports everywhere. Like, for instance, MIT said by the year 2025, 1 out of 2 babies born will have autism. 1 out of 2. Now, they say it's Roundup. Well, Roundup's terrible. Evidently, they don't realize, or they haven't talked to Dr. Wortman. Dr. Wortman was really wonderful in Congress about how bad it was, and then he changed sides. But they know that it's aspartame. And then along comes CDC and writes a report, and CDC knows because they did the investigation, and then they wrote a summary that was against their own investigation, and then just put the summary up there. And so I put the entire investigation on our website and held it up in the documentary Sweet Misery of Poison World, so you could see it's like 118 pages. It's not a paragraph that says, oh, these were just mild findings, because I simply can't see that grand mal seizures and mood alteration, cardiac arrest, myocardial infarctions, all these horrible things, including death, is mild. I definitely have never seen a mild case of death. So so the CDC did that. Then they put this thing out and says, if a woman, this is how bad birth defects are today because of aspartame. They said if you want to get pregnant, do not use any alcohol. If you have any idea of it in the future, take birth control pills. Can you imagine? And you can find that on Google. It's on the internet. Don't use any alcohol. Now, why did they say that? Because you got free methyl alcohol in aspartame that's causing all these things. And finally, when I was able to get those studies, then the FDA released them. Now, interestingly, they had them all along. After Dr. Roberts talked to Jerome Bressler, he writes his congressman, and he tells his congressman that the FDA, this is a matter of public record, and he wants them. So his congressman writes the FDA, and the FDA writes back. And they don't say we don't have them. They say they're confidential. Now, here's what the FDA is saying is confidential. Half the population is using a chemical poison that will cause your children to be ruined for the rest of their life. They can grow up and have cancer, which is one of Dr. Sifredi's studies showing that it causes breast cancer, and that if the woman's pregnant and the baby survives, because it is an abortifacient and a teratogen, that it can grow up and have cancer. So this is too confidential for the public to know, to avoid, so they can miscarry their babies or have them born with ADD or autistic, like in one case. And see, they didn't want you to drink alcohol because it's like one woman who has an ADD child and one with autism, and I said, "Oh, I am so sorry you used aspartame during pregnancy." She said no, but my doctor at Emory said I had stopped it before I got pregnant, but she said it had built up in my system. And, of course, it's, the methanol turns to formaldehyde and embalms living tissue like the Crocco study shows and damages DNA and turns your tissues to plastic. So it's a cumulative poison. So now we got these problems all over the world. And finally, when I put them up there, evidently the FDA thought, well, there's no use to hiding them. She's got them all over the world now. I probably put out 20 articles about it. So they released some more of them to Dr. Monte, and he wrote the book, While Science Sleeps, A Sweetener Kills. And you can go to his website and read the last chapter on aspartame and autism free. But after you read it, you'll want to get the book because it's absolutely incredible. He tells how they blew up his house with him in it and how the FDA made a deal with G.D. Searle to seal those studies so the public would never know that they were using something that would destroy their children. So, I mean, I can't think of anything more heinous or evil. But that's, that's
Explain to us, Dr. Betty, the vicious circle with aspartame and diabetics.
Well, first of all, they push it on diabetics.
Yes.
And, Dr. Roberts, who wrote the medical text, Aspartame Disease and Ignored Epidemic, and there's still a few copies on Amazon. He passed away a couple of years ago, and if you can get it, everybody ought to get a copy of it. It's one way to prove if you've got a problem when you go to the doctor, you take the book with you. And, for instance, look under diabetes, because I asked him when he was writing, and I said, Dr. Roberts, please give the mechanism by which aspartame causes the disease. And he had a very good way. I was never, I was born without the brevity gene. That's why my articles are a little bit long. But Dr. Roberts had a very brief way of explaining the whole problem. So in the case of diabetes, I says, okay, I want to explain this in one sentence. He says aspartame precipitates diabetes, which is called the diabetic epidemic. It simulates and aggravates diabetic retinopathy and neuropathy. It destroys the optic nerve, causes diabetics to go into convulsions, interacts with insulin, and the free methyl alcohol makes them lose their limbs. So if you want to kill a diabetic, just give them some aspartame. It doesn't take long. They get cardiomyopathy. They get all the problems so many of them that are in the medical text that it's very hard. It is very hard to find things that it doesn't cause because it ravages every organ in the body. And as you know, I was in the hospital. Here I am educating all these doctors. They agree with me. They bring in more doctors. The doctors come back for extra copies. I had reprinted, just had 1,000 more copies reprinted, Rock Gut, Aspartame, Methanol Mania. That gets everybody off of them. And they sent in the nurses and the pharmacist. And then they turned around and gave me a couple of drugs that by IV were okay, but in generic form had aspartame in them. And I stopped breathing on 3 occasions and then got urticaria hives from one end of my body to the other. I mean, I just look like a walking hive. And so now I'm chemically hypersensitive for life. And I have never knowingly used aspartame, which should tell you how many things it's in it that we do not know, that they just don't put in there. Even when, just like sugar, you know, who made us a safe sweetener, and I said, why is it taking so long to make some aspartame-free gum? Because, you know, Dr. Walton told me that every gum on the market, regardless of what it says, has aspartame in it. He says because, and so anyway, Mike Silver told me, he says, well, it's because that anything made on petroleum, the kind of machine, since I don't know exactly anything about the machine that they make gum on, he says cannot be used to make safe aspartame, safe gum aspartame-free. He says we have to build a machine to make a gum that is free of aspartame and that is safe. And he told me it would take several months, you know, and it's oh gosh, it's been 4 or 5 months I think now, but I think it's you know it's almost ready. And you see children chewing it, and people think that diet drinks are the worst, and of course it's liquid. And I would say, in my personal opinion, it has to be one of the worst. But Dr. Roberts always felt that aspartame gum was the worst because it's a neurotoxic drug and it works like nitroglycerin under the tongue and it goes through saliva straight to the brain. And so now on my website we've made a little button at the top where you could click on it and read Dr. Roberts' article on gum and some other information, and it's in his medical text. So, you know, if you and there's so many problems people don't even have any idea of. For instance, rosacea. You know, many doctors say you're born with rosacea, you can treat it, but it's not curable. You're going to have a red face the rest of your life. Well, the methanol in aspartame turns your face red and causes rosacea. But the difference is that when you get off of it, usually in about 6 months, rosacea disappears. So I was thinking, you know, you heard about Diane Fleming, whose husband used aspartame and creatine and died of the methanol poisoning. And we didn't know that they had put aspartame and creatine unlabeled, you know, and sentenced her to 30 years. And he was using so much aspartame that he had 2 drugs that were for rosacea, which shows you how much methanol was in his body. And,
yeah.
You know, and then he was addicted. And Dr. Roberts also very briefly explained the addiction. Methanol is classified as a narcotic. It causes chronic methanol poisoning. This affects the dopamine system of the brain and causes the addiction. And so in order to be addicted, you're going to have chronic methanol poisoning, which was on the autopsy. And all was asked at this hearing was simply that they do a test on it from the beginning. You have to remember, Diane Fleming, the police, the hospital said he died of methanol poisoning, called the police. Diane called the police. Diane gave him the last thing he drank. And when the movie Sweet Misery that she's in was made, I called the police, and he said she's not guilty. She had 3 she did 3 lie detector tests and passed. She helped us. She called us, and we refused to indict her. She was indicted by a grand jury. He just said, but by the very day that I would have stopped it, they promoted me and took me off the case. So, it's all political. They don't want to know how many people are dying of methanol poisoning. And this poor woman, that was the last hearing. They wouldn't let them do the test, so it's political. They disqualified the person that did the research. And then there was an expert for rebuttal, and they said he didn't do something right. Maybe he put his name on the wrong line. And so, they knew that it was an aspartame case, and they didn't want to ruffle anybody's feathers. So why in the world, under what circumstances, it take 15 minutes to do a study of the Gatorade and find out exactly what the ingredients were in there and what manufacturer was used, so that they would know. And he was drinking diet drinks all day long, and he was using products that had aspartame in it. And one of them was Metrex. I don't know if aspartame's still in it. I know that the one health food store called me and says, "Are you trying to put me out of business?" I said, if you keep selling things with poison in it, you need to be out of business. You cannot poison the public. Do you understand now? Then he hung up. But he was using all these products, plus he was using something like Equal in his food. And you wonder why he lived as long as he did. And she was using it too and didn't know it. And she was so upset about being indicted because she couldn't figure out why they would indict her. And so they put her on Zoloft, and she was drinking Equal in her coffee, and, it damages the mitochondria so that it interacts. And so she became like a zombie. She could show no emotion. So since there was no evidence of anything to prove that she was guilty of this, they polled the jury years later, and they said, if you knew she'd been drugged and she couldn't show emotion, would you have got a guilty plea? And they said no. He says, if we had known it, but we didn't know it. So everything was done wrong, and this poor Sunday school teacher who helped the homeless has got 15 years more unless there is somebody out there that can come and help. We got our pro bono attorney. Nothing we did, and we've been working on the case for 15 years. And this is not the only one. There was one in New York where the woman, she thought it was a diet drink, and some organizations recently wrote the Federal Trade people and said they're selling it as dying it when it causes an obesity epidemic. And you know what the Federal Trade people said? Well, we don't have the time or the money, to do all this. Well, that's their job. And then they had the gall, when I wrote them and told them that, to send me a website on obesity. And I wrote them back and I said, I weigh 115 pounds. I'm not interested in a website on obesity, but I am interested on you allowing somebody to think it's a diet product and use it to lose weight. And they balloon up, and you see these people weighing 300 and 400 pounds. And that's what this woman did. She says, well, I don't know why. I use all these aspartame products, and I keep gaining weight. So she says, well, from now on, I'm using nothing but aspartame products. And, of course, she dropped dead of methanol poisoning. And last I heard, they were thinking of sending her husband to jail, even though there was no evidence.
So we have a guest that would like to ask a question, Dr. Betty.
Okay.
Welcome to the call, Arizona. You have a question for Dr. Betty?
Yes, I do. Dr. Betty, you say that aspartame is in some drugs?
2,000, last I heard.
Oh, wow. That includes psych meds, right?
Includes what?
Psychiatric medication?
Oh, yes. Incidentally, it first of all, it depletes serotonin, and causes psychiatric and behavioral problems, especially suicidal tendencies and bipolar, and it interacts with all antidepressants. So just to give you an example, Dr. Sandra Lance, I gave a lecture here in Atlanta, and she says, I brought my mother. She's addicted to aspartame. She got breast cancer from it. I can't get her off. Will you please talk to her? And I spent about an hour or so talking to her after the lecture. But, she would stare, and it obviously had caused, it had depleted enough serotonin to cause the mental problems. She ended up in a mental hospital. In the mental hospital, they gave her more Diet Coke and psychiatric drugs, and so she hung herself.
Oh.
And I could tell, I could give you case after case after case after case,
Wow.
And every doctor I've talked to, and I work with Dr. Ralph Walton, who's a psychiatrist, and like Dr. Robert said, I heard Dr. Blaylock say it too, that the mental hospitals are full of people that are nothing more than aspartame victims. It is a psycho drug. If you want to know exactly what it is, if you had to explain it, it's an addictive, neurotoxic, carcinogenic, genetically engineered drug adjuvant, which is an immune stimulator, and teratogene that damages the mitochondria or the powerhouse of the cell and interacts with drugs and vaccines.
How would you suggest
I
counteract? Because I have to take 4 psychiatric meds.
Are you on aspartame?
Yeah, I don't know if they have the. I'm on Abilify, Lexapro, Lamictal, and gabapentin.
Okay, first of all, you should do something that I did not do when I was in the hospital. There is it's a class action on Zofran. Oh, and they were giving me Zofran for nausea IV. No aspartame in this. Well, anyway, it wasn't until I got out that I looked it up. See, because of insurance companies, they give you things in generic form. And there it was. You can go on the internet, and what you do, like I put in Zofran and aspartame, and of course it came up. It has a different generic name, and there it was, aspartame. Now, the reason there's a class action on it is because they were giving pregnant women who were nauseous, had morning sickness, Zofran, and they gave them generic. It had aspartame in it, so the children were born with birth defects. And so that's why the action. Then they gave me Reglan. And the doctor said, I'm telling you, there is no aspartame in this. And, of course, there wasn't in the IV. But then when I started getting brain fog and I said, yeah, I just got to thinking, these were all aspartame symptoms. I don't use aspartame. And I looked up the generic for Reglan, and there it was, aspartame. So what you do is you get on the Internet and you look up. First of all, look on the box and see if you got it by generic name. Look it up.
It's a generic. They're all generic except for
that's where they had it. So put the generic name in, and then put AND aspartame, and if aspartame's in it, you'll just get dozens and dozens or hundreds of warning things with showing it as an ingredient. But why are you using it is what I'm asking is, or have you, because aspartame has many names. When we exposed the methanol, they called it, they changed the name to amino sweet. And then they've got Sugar Twin 1, Sugar Twin 2, one has it in it, and then they've got Equal, Canderel, Benevia, Spoonful, and now they've approved Avantate and Neotane. So no matter, it's got so many names on it. If you're in New Zealand, it just says, I went through the grocery store and I picked up a box, and in very tiny letters that most people couldn't even read, it said 951. And in Europe, it's E951. So you can pick up a tube of toothpaste, and on the back of it may say 951, and you have no idea 951 stands for aspartame.
Right.
So what I tell people...
Well, I'm very cautious about aspartame, and I check everything out in the food that I eat. But, I'm very, very upset about this business with this medication. I'm a targeted individual, Dr. Betty, and I was put on medication against my will.
Well, why, if you don't mind me asking?
Because I had a lawsuit against a large company. And in order for them to get me off their back, they had to pronounce me mentally ill. So they
and you didn't get an attorney
and Scientology.
Ma'am, I was in a city. No matter where I went, the attorneys were all compromised. I'm in Tucson, Arizona. And all the attorneys were compromised. I went everywhere. I tried everything. I tried getting psychiatrists that weren't.
Medication on her, Dr. Betty, because they want to make her look crazy and incompetent. They don't want her. They want to discredit her.
I had a run-in with the Church of Scientology, essentially, because my boss found out that I had been a member of the Church of Scientology, and they contacted them. And I was on staff, actually, with the Church of Scientology. They signed me up when I was 17 years old, and they did that illegally. So fortunately for me, they can't come back and say I owe them a lot of money because they signed me up when I was too young. But I have information about them which is very damning. And they...
Well, the Inquirer has been printing it little by little. Have you seen all that?
Oh, yeah. Well, now what's happened is that the Supreme Court has declared that they are no longer nonprofit organization.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they aren't allowed to be tax exempt anymore.
Well, that's
good.
That's
right.
Well, I don't know a lot about them. One person did ask me to go see them when I was in Hollywood out there. I think they're out there at Hollywood and Vine because they hate aspartame. Didn't have anything to do with religion, but they knew from the beginning that it was poison, and they were. But the Inquirer has really explained some of the really bad things that they have done, and it's just a shame what people call religion.
Yeah.
It's in fact. I'm one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and that's why I've done this. I've been doing this for 25 years, but at my expense. My witness ministers are not paid because Jesus said, freely you receive, freely give. So he sold his company. He says, I'm going to show you the world. And then we found out about aspartame. He said, how can we, be a Christian and love your neighbor as yourself if we know we got a killer that half the population is using, and we don't take this money and spend our time warning everybody so that we can save the lives of millions of people. And as people found out throughout the world, we set up operations in 43 countries, and they change, and then they translate everything into French and Spanish and all the different religions, all the different languages, rather, so that people that may never would have found out. Our Mission Possible Hong Kong says, over here, they know better by cartoons. They did it in cartoons instead of Chinese language. It was kind of funny. I said, look, anything that works. But that's why we do this, is because of what is real. And the thing of it is today, what makes it so bad, I guess you know what Agenda 21 is. That's, trying to depopulate. And I live in Duluth, Georgia, which is about 2 hours from Melbourne, where they have the Georgia Guidestones saying they want to get rid of 93% of the population, leaving it at 500 million, you know. So now we have to deal with interactions of things like aspartame, sulfate, potassium, sucrose, GMO, vaccinations, chemtrails, all these different things. And Dr. Blaylock says with chemtrails and all that barium and aluminum, he said nothing will ever grow again. You can't go back. He told me to take curcumin every night. He said it's the only thing that'll save you. It'll give people Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and you know. So we have all these problems, and the only thing I tell you, the smartest thing somebody said, if it's got a label on it, don't buy it. That's the only way you can make sure that you're not, you know, getting something that has bad on it. And I had just told Mary that I had just sent her another email, and you can get on my list, either on my Mission Possible list, or you can go to my website and subscribe, and you'll get every one of my emails. But, you know, now they're talking about aspartame in 17 dairy products without labeling, you know. And
without labeling.
Without labeling, because they and it's in let's see, what did they say? Whipped cream, yogurt, milk, you know. So and the FDA says so the children will drink it if they see it says reduced calories or you know, or aspartame. They're not going to use it, and so this isn't an effort. And so what does it do? It destroys the brains of our children. And if you, for instance, my website, it's hard to remember, mpwhi.com, but it stands for Mission Possible World Health International. And if you go and you just, I know this is technical, but if you read Dr. John Oney's testimony to the Board of Inquiry, and it's like 50 pages, you know, he says birth defects are a given. And if they compound it with MSG, you know, you have all these terrible problems. And he was the founder of the field of neuroscience called excitotoxicity. Dr. Blaylock wrote the book on it. So, you know, Dr. Elsis went to, he's a pediatric geneticist, went to Congress and told him, you know, that what phenylalanine would do and that it's going to cause birth defects. And he was right here at Emory, you know, in Atlanta where I am. And I went over there because they've got Eggleston and they've got Children's, and the doctors don't know. You know, they've kept this from, because they fund these trade organizations that tell the doctors that, you know, it's safe. And so they don't know. And I thought, my goodness, how in the world are we going to save all those children over there? And I filled up my trunk and my back seat, and I had doctor's reports and all this information. And I went all the way through Emory and through Eggleston. And then you heard this speaker, Martini is in the building. So they were after me, but it was too late. You know, it was a done deal, and I got lost and ended up in the doctor's parking lot, so put a doctor's packet on every car. So what are their other hospitals Emory used had somebody was there I went to see, and they said, look at the menu, and it says we no longer have aspartame in our food. But that's what it took. And not only that, I decided, gee, while I'm at it, I'll go to the CDC, and, you know, they have a medical detector. And the lady I was with, she says, you know, this big meeting here, you're not allowed to give out anything. I said, really? So when they were, you know, making their speeches, you know, I was just going around here, take one and pass it down. And I finally got all the way around, and the lady says, come here, you can't do this. But I'd already finished. I said I was leaving anyway. But I went over to the CDC, and as people were going through the medical detector, I was giving out flyers. And I always remember this scientist said, because I had something on it that got me in, and he says it's about time the CDC told people aspartame's poison. So, you know, we just had to do...
Dr. Betty, let me ask you something, because this person here that's on the phone has a nerve problem, and I know it's from the psychiatric drugs that they're court ordering her to take.
Well,
Can she possibly use the fact that aspartame's in these drugs as a defense to legally get off of them?
Well, I was going to say, before I got into the other, that the first thing she needs to do is find out if aspartame's in them. She can do that very easy by Googling the name of the drug and aspartame. If it's in it, of course, it causes all the neurological things. And I'll tell you something, and I'm glad to, if she will email me, privately, and my email is Betty, BETTYM 19 at Mindspring, MINDSPRING.com. I will send her something a pharmacist sent me. Actually, it was sent to me because I have a son that had a stroke. But anyway, I have never seen anything that will clear up the neurological problems and get rid of the damage to the mitochondria. And this is the research on it is incredible, and I'd like to send it to her. She might want to know about it, and if she's got a doctor that's open-minded and not somebody court-ordered, they might like to look at the research. That might help her tremendously. I can't recommend anything, but I can definitely send you the research for your doctor to look over. And if you've got a doctor that's not open-minded, and that will not look at research, maybe you got the wrong doctor. But
well, actually, now I have found a psychiatrist who will take me off of these medications.
Oh, well, that's
wonderful.
wonderful.
But every time I try to get off of the meds, they start to gang stalk me, and I got put in the mental hospital at one point because I was a religious fanatic and I carried my Bible with me everywhere. That was their reason.
You're kidding.
And I was off of my medication, and they put me back on it.
You know what? Well, they don't know whether you're taking it or not, so that's between you and the good doctor that took you off of it.
Right. No, I haven't seen her yet. But I'm going to be seeing her shortly.
I was trying to think, what's the name of that, the people on free speech, the you know who I'm talking about?
ACLU?
ACLU, is that what it is?
American Civil Liberties Union, yeah.
Yeah, I just wonder if they would help you on the fact, that are an attorney, that this country was founded on freedom of religion. If you want to carry a Bible, you can carry a Bible, and they can't do this to you because you were because you carry a Bible.
Boy, they're really going after religion, Dr. Betty.
Well, they're doing it all over the country. Yeah. I know. Well, Obama is a Muslim, and so that's the problem that they have. I guess you saw the lawsuit where one father, they were trying to get Christians to become Muslims, and the father filed a lawsuit against the school. You can Google that. So yes, I know that. That's like reading the Bible end times of the things that are going to happen, and things are happening now. That's really so bad.
Absolutely. All you got to do is pay attention.
Yes, be on the watch. That's what the Bible tells you to do, to be on the watch. But that's something that is so outrageous. Let me see.
Mm-hmm.
First thing, I would call them, your right to carry it under the Constitution. Then I would get an attorney, and if you can't afford one, I would get a pro bono attorney, because that's against the Constitution. And I tell you something else you can do. There is a list, and it's called Law Discuss. And it's mostly attorneys, but I'm on it. And you can subscribe to it. And you can tell them the problems, and that you were carrying a Bible, and that this is against the Constitution because that grants us freedom of religion, and that if it's all right that people carry a Koran to school, that you can carry a Bible wherever you wish to carry. That's why one of the reasons this country was founded. And they'll tell you what to do, who to call, and where, because, I'm not an attorney and I don't know the legalities, but when I don't know something, I go ahead and put it on that list and say, will you tell me who I contact? And I've done it many times because I've been trying to get information on how to help Diane Fleming out of prison. So, so usually when you don't know something, you go to, to the people, that are. But that is so wrong. They've just torn the Constitution apart. And
well, they said I was a religious fanatic. I mean, there were other reasons they said I had to go in too, but that was one of the ones my psychiatrist gave me, was that I was a religious fanatic and I carried my Bible with me everywhere.
Well, when you're a targeted individual, Dr. Betty, they will come up with any excuse in the world to label you crazy.
Listen, I know it. I saw something on TV, and I thought I had seen everything. They try to get so bad against religion that, when people graduate and they'll say, God bless you, they stopped them from doing that. And so at the very end,
and they're stopping, a lot of the schools pray before a football game, and they're making that illegal.
Well, listen to this. What happened is somebody in the front stood up and went, achoo, and then the person said, God bless you. That's how they did it. But I'll tell you what I saw, that if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed the country had come to this. Somebody was playing football or some kind of sports, I don't even remember. He wanted to get a championship, and he won. And he was so happy. He didn't say not one word out of his mouth. He just looked up, as if thanking God. Not one word, and they took away his championship for looking up. And that's the sickest you can get. You wouldn't know this is America. But anyway, this is what the Bible predicts in the end times.
Yeah.
So you simply have to just keep looking, and you write articles. Like for instance, the case in the hospital and the things that they did. I mean, when I told them that they wrote me another prescription with aspartame in it, and I had it on my file that no aspartame, chemically hypersensitive. And I turned around to the nurse and I said, do you know the legality of giving somebody something they said they're allergic to? And she says, I know what I know. I said, you don't know anything. I said, I've been doing this 25 years. I work with the world experts. Medical text is dedicated to me. And I said, you want to tell me you know something about aspartame? She says, well, Emory uses Zofran and Reglan. And I said, just because they use it does not give you the right to knock off the patient. So anyway, then the doctor turns around and writes another prescription with aspartame in it. So I wrote the whole thing up. I'm sure you've read it on my website. I think I put it through. I like oogenesis, which means, you go in the hospital to get well, and then you come out either disabled or dead. Aspartame, the pumps, and E. coli. And I almost died 3 times from aspartame. The other time, I had no idea that these scopes, like endoscopics, cannot be cleaned, and they've known at least 7 years, that they're giving people E. coli in the blood. And they told me I had 14 days to live. They said, we have 14 days. If we can't kill it, it'll kill you. And when I got out, Peggy Sparks, this lady says, I thought I'd wait and see if you survived before I tell you this. I said, well, thank you very much. And she says, but her mother died 6 years ago after having an endoscopic, and the other lady that shared her room had an endoscopic, and she died of E. coli in the blood. And would you realize, a week later I get an email from the LA Times saying that the FDA went so far as to strike off the names of the hospitals so that they could not follow the outbreak. CDC, which is always low, said that, it kills, that they cited a report that said 1 out of 2 die of it. It's probably more like 80%. You can't live with E. coli in your blood.
Another depopulation tactic.
Yeah, that's what I'm telling you. I think aspartame is probably the worst thing on the planet because Dr. Deagle told me, he said, because of its ubiquitous use in food and drugs, it's more dangerous than depleted uranium. And
now, the government has admitted that they caused Gulf War syndrome. Are those veterans having a lawsuit? Do you know, Dr. Betty? Are they going to be compensated for the fact that they gave them pop that sat out in the desert and turned to pure poison?
Well, let me just tell you, there's a power structure in this country, and nothing gets done. Just like, look at this thing where the FDA admitted they had no power, so that, Big Pharma is running it. They were, one of the people from the FDA, this was in 2009, was so upset that they revealed this, that they took their anger out on me by calling me up and telling me that the bans were, just forget it. And I said people were sick and dying all over the world. I lecture all over the world. They said, so what? We have to depopulate. And so evidently they were still mad at that. But that was in 2009. This is 2016, and nobody has done anything since. Congress didn't do anything. And obviously Obama didn't do anything. And he knows he was using it. And Dr. Roberts' medical text was delivered into the hands of his wife, Michelle, who didn't even write a thank you note, but to Dr. Roberts with a letter because she was interested in children. And if you don't get aspartame out of the schools, they are all going to have all these behavioral problems. The interesting thing, why would anybody who had 1% of intelligence, anybody who was normal, go against a bill that was written in Congress that simply asked that the NIH do independent studies on what they were seeing aspartame causing in the population, what it did to the fetus, the seizures, the behavioral problems in children, the drug interaction, etc., and to put a moratorium on aspartame until those studies could be done. And it never even got out of committee. Why would anybody not want to find out what was killing people everywhere? Why would intelligent people, why would not everybody in Congress sign it if they had 1% of interest in the lives of the people? Why are they doing this? It's like Jesus said, the devil is running the world.
Yeah.
It is, just things that any human being with any amount of intelligence would want to do for the safety of the public. And so, and a lot of people try to get me involved in a lot of other things. I said, do you believe aspartame takes 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? I could sit here at this computer and just answer people that are sick and dying. I mean, there is never a time when I was doing it in the hospital. I was educating the doctors and the nurses in one hospital. They brought me a get well wish, the employees, the doctors and things, and they had signed a pledge. We pledged never, ever, ever to use aspartame again, and then they all signed it, and at the bottom they said, please get well. But that's because I educated the hospital.
Yeah.
And, but do you think that they're still not using aspartame in the hospital and that they're still not writing prescriptions? And they stay so busy, they never think to look at what's in the generic or what the ingredient is. And half the time they don't know. They don't know. And and I should say this for your listeners, Dr. Blaylock always says that every day you should take magnesium because it protects the heart and the brain from excitotoxins. And he recommends Jigsaw, which is on the internet, which is a very fine company. And that's the one that I use. And I know the reason that he recommends that company is because if you go to a health food store, you can find it's chelated with other things. You can find magnesium aspartate, and aspartate's what's in aspartame. So you've got to be careful of anything that you buy. Today, researching is part of saving your life. I mean, I've been researching for 50 years, and it didn't save me in the hospital. I mean, I almost died so many times that that what I wrote is being published in a book. And just a couple of days ago, you probably got it. And I think it's because I put this thing all over the world, and now they're finally admitting, well, these scopes have probably affected more people than we realize. Well, of course, can you imagine the hospital coming up and saying, excuse me, we gave you the E. coli, we were responsible, but we wish to apologize. Most people die of it, and they have no idea that the hospital is responsible. And
yeah. Okay, Dr. Betty, we have another question.
Okay.
Yes, Arizona, you have a question?
Yes, I'm wondering if aspartame is in animal feed, and if the animal then absorbs aspartame into its meat.
Well, that's a very good question. The only thing I have seen is a study somebody sent me. It was very, very interesting. They put aspartame. They put a pile of aspartame and then a pile of sugar, and I don't know what else it was. And they did this study on cats and dogs. And the interesting thing is that none of the cats and dogs would eat it. In other words, animals seem to know about poison. And, I use Equal to kill ants because it's the best ant killer there is. It really is.
I had some here, and I went out. I had a big ant hill in the back of my property, and I dumped it all over that ant hill, and they disappeared.
Yeah, I know. I told Monsanto, I said, if you're afraid you're going to lose money, just change the label to rat poison, or ant killer. But what was interesting, and I think probably you can Google it, if you Google ants and Equal, there's a video where somebody put some aspartame or Equal, down on the ground, and the ants built something over it, twigs over it, so other ants wouldn't get near it. That's pretty smart. That's pretty smart. And of course, I guess you heard me earlier say now they're thinking of feeding swine neotame, which is a stronger aspartame. And so I guess if they mix it in things to get them to use it, but animals know what poison is. And somebody had brought me a cake or something. I don't know, but anyway, I left it out there for the birds. Not a bird would touch it. And it reminds me of when I was on a ship, I was giving out flyers, and this woman sitting at a table, she says, oh, I don't need one. I live in Fort Myers. And I said, why? Is there something about Fort Myers, Florida, I don't know about? She said, yeah, they wrote a bill. They have restaurants outside, and they would put packets of Equal out there, and the birds would fly in and get the packets of Equal, and it says that a lot of times one of their legs would fall off, and they got the fastest cases of cancer and died. So they passed a law in Fort Myers that artificial sweeteners, they didn't say aspartame, I guess they were afraid of being sued, but everybody knew what it was, cannot be left outside of restaurants.
Oh, that's why the birds. See, I have a friend who is in California, and she said that the sparrows' feet were falling off.
Yep. And let me tell you, I was in Seattle one time, and we ate in one of those outside restaurants. They make the best sourdough, and whatnot. And I noticed so many of those birds with the legs, with only one leg, and wondered why. And that's why. So it is poison to animals. I mean, look how many rats it killed in the original study or gave them brain tumors. And one lady, I don't know if you can still get the book, is Diet Coke Killing You, I think is the name of it, but you could go to Google and see if there's any left because she died very quickly. But they couldn't get people to, she couldn't get people to believe her. So she said, well, I'll just do my own study. And she went and got a bunch of rats. And in the book, it shows that the tumors that, they ought to change the name of aspartame to tumor often, were so big the rats were using it as a pillow. And the pictures are in the book.
I saw the
and I mean, it is so poisonous that, and yet the FDA, and they back in 1986, they did take it. Community Nutrition Institute, that'd be Dr. Monty. He took it all the way to the Supreme Court, and so I was trying to see if I had that book in front of me. I'd give you the name of it, but I guess it's upstairs. Okay, anyway, they took it to the Supreme Court, and the FDA had a meeting and said, well, we're getting ready to take aspartame off the shelves. And it was before my time. It was in 1986, and I think I started warning about 1990. And I said, well, why didn't they do it? He says, well, look up the reputation of the judge. So, in other words, they've got so much power. And there is a reason. There's another reason why they don't want it off the market. And that's because one of the stories I've told that is so amazing is that we have here in Atlanta a organic market and health food store called Return to Eden. And I knew the owner, Wendy, and one day she said, let me help you. I said, okay, what do you want? She said, give me 16 of the worst articles you got. People dying. There's an article Alex Constantine wrote about how it was first listed with the Pentagon in an inventory of biochemical warfare weapons submitted to Congress. Joyce Wilson, who died like an Alzheimer patient, and they call it, and it triggers Alzheimer's. But anyway, all this, I gave her the worst ones, and she made a 16-page brochure called Telecola. And, by the hundreds of thousands, and about 2,000 people a day would go through the market, and every bag, she put that in there, and all of a sudden people came in and started getting them by the stacks. So finally, we often tell people, you don't believe it, take 60-day no aspartame test. So what happened was that the articles were so bad that people that didn't even know they had problems with aspartame got off of it. They'd been going to doctors for years. And at the end of about 60 days, people began to wake up well. So MS patients were walking out of wheelchairs. I opened the door. My address and information was not even in the brochure. But I opened the door, and a woman fell in my arms, and she said, I was blind, and now I can see. Because if vision is in the wet stage and you can warn them in time, people that are legally blind can see again. If it hasn't done that much damage. And she said that people with fibromyalgia, because aspartame hardens the synovial fluids, were able to walk again. She says the blind can see, the crippled can walk. People are walking out of wheelchairs. And doctors were so shocked when these patients went back and said, I don't have any of these problems anymore, that I wrote an article called And the Sick Woke Up Well, and the doctors were getting these magazines, and they'd make copies of one of the pages, and every day they'd give their patients a new article until that it got around. And even 10 years later, I'd walk up to somebody and give them a flyer, and they'd say, "Oh, I don't need that. I got a brochure from Return to Eden 10 years ago, and I hadn't used it since. All my problems disappeared." And, for instance, because I'm kind of pushy, so if it'll save a life, I'll continue to be pushy. But I stopped an ambulance once and gave them all the information. I said, 80% of what you pick up is due to aspartame. He said, "Well, thank you very much." And then I was in the hospital about 6 years later with my husband in the emergency room, and this man came up and hugged and kissed me. And I don't mean he kissed me on the cheek. I mean he really, really kissed me. And I said, "Do we know each other?" And he said, "You don't remember me?" I said, "I'm afraid not." He says, "You stopped my ambulance." I said, "Oh, well, I do occasionally do that." And he says, "Well," he said, "we got rid of all the aspartame. Everybody in my family got well. I started training other medics, and now we knew, and we found out you were right, that these people that were having seizures and heart attacks and all this stuff was due to aspartame. That's all we did was get them off." And so, anyway, I'm glad my husband was sleeping. Then he was laying there sleeping because, I can't remember. I give out information to thousands of people, so, I don't remember everybody, but I thought that was probably one of the funniest things that had happened. So I always...
Dr. Betty, read us off a list of what the side effects of aspartame.
Oh, well, what you want is the FDA report, and incidentally, you can click that button on my website, and the first one is headache, and the second one is nausea, and then it has, mood alteration, seizures, male sexual dysfunction, the diabetic problem. Let me see. I don't have one right in front of me right now, but
the diabetic problem for people that are diabetic and they say, "I have to drink Diet Pop, I have to eat Equal." The dietitian told me that all they're doing is causing their diabetes to spike. Am I correct?
Well, it's more than that because it's not only that. Many times they're not even diabetics. One of the studies shows that it raises fasting blood sugar, and sometimes they find out that they're not even diabetics. But here's the list, and I mean this could go on and on. You can stop me when you want me to. Seizures, dizziness, mood quality, vomiting and nausea, abdominal pain and cramps, change in vision, that includes blindness, diarrhea, seizures and convulsions, memory loss, fatigue, weakness, neurological problems, rash, sleep problems, big-time insomnia, hives, change in heart rate, and it causes sudden cardiac death, itching, change in sensation, numbness, tingling, grand mal seizures, local swelling, change in activity level, difficulty breathing, oral sensory changes, change in menstrual pattern. It causes infertility as well. Skin problems, localized pain and tenderness, urogenital, change in body temperature, difficulty swallowing, metabolic problems, joint and bone pain, speech impairment, other gastrointestinal, chest pain, other musculoskeletal, fainting, sore throat, cardiovascular, change in taste, difficulty with urination, respiratory problems, edema, change in hearing, abdominal swelling, change in saliva output, change in urine volume, change in perspiration pattern, eye irritation, unspecified muscle tremors, petit mal seizures, change in appetite, change in body weight, nocturnal change in water intake, unconsciousness, coma, wheezing, constipation, extreme pain, problems with bleeding, unsteady gait, coughing, blood glucose disorders, blood pressure changes, changes in skin and nail coloration, change in hair and nails, excessive phlegm production, sinus problems, simple partial seizures. I mean, it keeps on going on. It's just as Joyce Wilson's husband said. It ravages every organ in the body.
Well, they had a plan to make people sick. I mean, between the aspartame, the chemtrails, the fluoride, and I don't know if you realize how many nuclear power plants are leaking radiation right now, but they're keeping that under wraps. There's one up in New York City, Indian Point. They found that it's been leaking in the water, and they're trying to keep it quiet. That it has come out, and I can't remember. There were two other ones too now that are leaking. So
our water
is poisoned.
And then you got Fukushima, and it's killing the fish. So a fish is not safe to eat. And then I read an article the other day.
You hear about the big tuna recall?
The what?
Tuna. They're recalling a whole bunch of tuna that they said it's full of radiation.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the fishes. I mean, it's hard to eat any of the fish. And then I read an article where they had approved the genetic engineering of salmon. And they said, but it hasn't yet come to the U.S., but it's next. And I can even remember when there was an article in the paper where Congress said, no, we don't want the FDA to genetically engineered salmon, and they're going to do it anyway. It means, that whoever, the power structure is getting what it wants done. And the pharmaceutical industry has bottomless checkbooks. They can buy anybody wants. There's always somebody out there with their hand out.
Well, illness is a big business. Big Pharma's making a lot of money. The doctors are making a lot of money.
Yeah, it cost them 2 cents. I watched as the crowds of people marched on Washington because of the high price of generic drugs, and they were making up all these excuses. Well, you know how much it costs for research, and NIH said, well, actually, they didn't pay anything that we paid for their research. It's like the tobacco people, lie after lie after lie.
Well, and those are the people that are greasing the palms of the congressmen.
Yeah.
It's just one vicious circle. And until the public wakes up and quits trusting the doctors and the government and thinking that they're all the good guys, and look at the facts. Look at the facts of what you're putting in your mouth. I'm just like you, Dr. Betty. When I'm in the store and I see someone buying Diet Pop, I go over and try to give them the information and tell them. A lot of people get angry. They say, oh, if it was poison, they wouldn't be allowed to put it on the shelf. There you go. May as well walk away and go, bah, I'm a good sheeple and I trust everybody.
Well, I just ordered 1,000 more reprints of Rotten Good aspartame. Many times I take the medical text, because it's as big as a New York phone directory, to the grocery store. And I never go without cards. They usually have flyers. And I do stop people, but a couple of weeks ago I had all of these appointments, and by the time I got to Costco, I was just worn out, and I only had the cards in my pocketbook. I think one piece of paper, and I was so tired. I just walked up to somebody, and they sell Diet Coke for 2-liter bottles, 4 at a time in this plastic container. And he had 2 of them. And I was so tired, I just said, put it back. And he looked at me and said, pardon me, ma'am? I said, put it back. He said, why? I said, well, first of all, it's causing your male sexual dysfunction. He says, is that what's causing it? I said, yeah. He said, but my wife uses it. I said, well, is there any reason why you want to poison your wife? He says, well, I didn't know it was poison. I said, you do now, don't you? Here's my card. Look at the FDA list of all the different problems. Check yours off. You have my email address. I said, look under Aspartame Resource Guide. You'll see Dr. Caldwell's detox and Dr. Blaylock's information. And I said, get as much of it out of your system. But start reading the labels. Now put it back while I'm watching you. He said, yes, ma'am. And he went back and put it back on there and came back. He said, I put it back. And I said, okay, you can go on and shop. He said, well, that's all I was shopping for. I said, well, then you can go home, can't you? You know? But sometimes you have to do that. I mean, it's you know, just like I did with an Air Force base when you know, industry got them to retract the U.S. Flying Safety is their magazine, and they had warned pilots about it, and then they retracted it. And you know that industry wrote it because the Air Force doesn't write things like aspartame is just living and breathing. That's not the words of the United States Air Force. And that the CDC investigation showed only mild findings. So I said, I'm going to send you the real CDC investigation. So I did. I said, are you going to retract your retraction? She said, no. The Pentagon told me that if you called back, for you to call them. I said, well, I've been wanting to talk to the Pentagon about them wanting to use a biochemical warfare weapon on the public. And so, you know, I called. First there was a recording on it. When I finally got them and mentioned aspartame, they hung up and took the recording off. So I called them back. I said, I just want you to know I will not allow the United States Air Force to fly planes using aspartame products, hot chocolate, Diet Coke, Diet Pepsi, whatever. I said, I'll just have to come down. She said, you can't. I said, oh, yes, I can. And so Dawn and I got a plane. We went on TWA, and we stopped. It was interesting. We were giving out flyers in the airport there in St. Louis, and some man says, I know more about aspartame than you do. I said, really? Well, tell me about it. And he says, well, my mother, you know, she rents an apartment to a doctor, and he says that the company went around all the doctors and said if they told anybody it causes Alzheimer's, that they'd sue them, you know. I said, well, that's interesting. So anyway, we, you know, changed planes there, and we went down to New Mexico. And my husband was real funny, you know. He rents a car and he goes up to her and says, well, here we are, dear. How are you going to get on the Air Force base? I said, well, sweetie, you know I always tell the truth. So I walked up to him and I said, you know, I need to talk to the Air Force police ASAP. They said, oh, okay, could you just stand back a minute while we get you a pass, and that'll let you get all over the Air Force base. I said, thank you very much. So they did, and I did exactly what I said I went. I went to the Air Force police, told them the problem, and I said, you know what, I'm running out of pilot packets for Mission Possible Aviation. I wonder if you could make me some more. So I had the Air Force police making me pilot packets. Then I asked them, I said, where are the pilots? They said, well, most of them are, you know, always in the, you know, the place where they all go to accumulate, whatever they call it.
The lounge? Pilot's lounge? Yeah,
they've got a, you know, yeah, where they all go. But anyway, so I went in there and I started giving them out. And I went around, you know, and went to several of them and gave them out until I really just didn't have any more. And so I told my husband, I said, okay, mission accomplished, we can go home. And he said, I don't think so. And I wish you could have seen it, Mary. We were surrounded by the Air Force police, the colonels, everybody. And they said, Madam, would you please step out of the car? And so I did. I said, what's the problem? They said, well, number one, if you wanted to see the pilot, you must have wanted to get to the planes, and we have war games tomorrow, and you may be a terrorist. And, of course, that just cracked me up, you know. And so then I explained what I was doing, and I gave them all the literature, and I had this article that Dr. Roberts wrote about me called Profile of a Super Volunteer Activist. The only thing you left out is how many times I brushed my teeth. So when they read that, you know, they kind of smiled, but he says, don't you ever do this again, and the Air Force Police are not your secretary. They're not supposed to be making your pilot packets. So I said, okay, it's all done anyway. So anyway, we left there, and it was very interesting because about 2 weeks later, I got a call from the Air Force Base, and the pilot said, listen, I want to thank you very much for coming down here. He says, we have a lot more power than you do, and I just wanted to let you know that you can be sure that everybody on this base will have a copy of your material. So, nothing ventured, nothing gained. Sometimes
that's right.
You have to do whatever you have to do to make sure that people are not poisoned, And
they're really going after the children, aren't they, Dr. Betty?
Yeah, that's the sorriest, sickest thing, that the FDA, who absolutely emphatically knows, has all the records, because they knew that it caused autism and wouldn't give them to us. So you can't say that, that they don't know. So they know that they are poisoning the kids with aspartame in the milk. And, of course, that's, a very, get them off of dairy. And that's where, and also there's the boycott quarterly. If you found out that there's something that is in, that's in a product or not labeled, or aspartame is in it, and just like I added Diet Coke and all these things, is that you can write to a boycott quarterly and say, that's why we have so many Mission Possible operations in the United States and in 43 countries, and it'll help that you have stationery made up if you're one of the operations, and say, Mission Possible Minnesota, we boycott this, and this. And
well, the school cafeterias shouldn't even be allowed to put low-fat chocolate milk out, because that's nothing but a little box of poison for them.
Yeah, but that's why they're taking the low-fat notice off. If you read the article, they're taking all that off, so it just says milk. It'll say chocolate milk. It will not say low-fat, reduced calorie, contains aspartame. All that's being taken off. So the kids won't know. They just think they're drinking milk. And, of course, what that will do to our kids, I think one of the best articles I ever read was in Parents Magazine in 1999, where they said that, it says, we're all good parents, but we can't find a family that's not affected. Why are our children having these problems? And it's like Dr. Barrett that called me from the Dominican Republic, and he said that there were 360 kids. This is in Dr. Roberts' medical text, incidentally. There were 360 kids, and they were all on milk. And he says, we just thought they were so little and so young, and they might end up with diabetes, that I would change the diet. So I gave them aspartame juice. And I said, oh, my God. He says, you wouldn't believe. I said, oh, you don't even have to tell me. What do you mean I wouldn't believe what you did to the kids? He said, well, the thing of it is, if 10%, 25%, 50% of the kids had problems, he said, but almost 100%. He said they had behavioral problems. They were hyperactive. They couldn't think. They didn't know what they were doing. He said it was the most unbelievable thing you've ever seen. And since the only thing I had done was given them aspartame, he said that I immediately knew what it is. I said, well, I hope you got them off of it. He says, well, we will. And I said that, and tell their parents not to give it to them. So anyway, he called me up, within, I think, 4 or 5 days later. He says, guess what? I said, you don't have to tell me. They all went back to normal. He said, yes. It was the aspartame. And that's in the medical book. So that shows you when you have all these behavioral problems that you see. And Dr. Roberts, if he told me once, he told me 100 times, when you see children killing children, you have to consider aspartame. And so you've got, violence. And somebody called me about how all these sheriffs were drinking somewhere down south. We're all on Diet Coke, and how many had committed suicide. And in fact, let me see what was the name of the show. It was next to Oprah's show. But anyway, it was in Texas. It was a talk show, and we had Mary, this lady, on here that first she was using aspartame. She was using Diet Coke, and she had a seizure from it while she was driving. Had an accident. Her child was with her. She ended up in the hospital, I think in a body cast. Anyway, she was, that's about the time that I met her. Sometime afterwards. So at the time, she didn't know it was aspartame, so she was still drinking it. So when she called me, she said she had been declared legally blind. And I said, well, that's the aspartame, and I don't know how long you've been on it, but get off of it, and hopefully you can get your vision back. She says, you mean there's a chance? I said, yes, there is. So that was about maybe 6 months after the accident. About 6 months later, I had her on that show. No more seizures, and her eyesight had been restored. But I noticed before we went on the air that she had, where she had cut her wrist on both of her hands, and I said, oh, my goodness, Mary, what did you do? She said while she was using NutraSweet that she, only thing she could think of was committing suicide, and she said as soon as she got off of it, those feelings went away.
And see, the problem, too, with the children, a lot of the schools are involved in this, and what they do is they push the psychiatric drugs on the parents, telling the children they're uncontrollable in school, and they have the aspartame in them, and then they're drinking the chocolate milk, or, eating, or parents will be buying sugarless candy, thinking that they're not giving their kids sugar, and it all interacts, Dr. Betty.
Listen, I have written so many articles saying our children are medicated instead of educated, and that's why I have told everybody I have ever spoken to or written to, and why I had the doctors write these reports. If you have a child in school, take this report. You'll see it on a banner on my website, Report for Schools, and give it to the teacher, give it to the PTA, to the principal, and to the Board of Education. Now, we did that in Chicago, and when they read those reports, they took it out of the grammar school and the middle school. We didn't get it out of the high school, but that report got it out. And when I was in New Zealand, I just couldn't believe this. I lectured about 3 weeks in New Zealand, and also talked to the health minister, who had made a deal with Coca-Cola that they would no longer provide Coca-Cola for the kids in New Zealand, but they would only provide Diet Coke. I said, they've lost their mind. So anyway, when I got home, because I was talking to the health minister, I said, I emailed him. He emailed me back. I said, I want to tell you something. I came 10,000 miles to help the people of New Zealand. I stayed there 3 weeks. And I said, my only concern was to help your people. You're health minister of New Zealand. I said, for that reason, all I ask is that you read the report for schools. And it's because I use large print, but it was like 43 pages long, because it has a report by Dr. Roberts. It has a report on the psychiatric problems by Dr. Walton. It had the whole issue by Dr. Blaylock. I even had Feingold, the ADD people, write an article, and I wrote an article. And actually, Chicago they didn't want to give them the whole thing, so they gave them my article, which is a letter saying, if you knew somebody was lurking behind your doors, and, they're going to give you scholarships and all this money, is it worth destroying the brains of our kids and have this happen and this happen? And it was to the Board of Education in Alabama. But in any way, it worked in Chicago, and it worked in another state. And when the teachers see this, if your teacher, the first day of school, they go in there, my mother, give it to the teacher, said for you to read this whole thing, and I am not to have anything that's in this. And just like in the thing I wrote about milk just before your show, I said, now, when you send your child to school, you make sure that you add something to drink in their lunch to make sure they're not getting this stuff. And that's the only thing you can do. But you take that to the board. The report itself has made changes everywhere. I mean, even when I was going to New Zealand, that was 2007, I think. That was about the time Hillary was running for the presidency, and she had 6 offices or something. And Stephen Fox called me and said, he said, will you fax the report for schools to her office, because she's talking about children and what they should eat. And I said, Stephen, I can't do this. I got to do a 6 a.m. radio program and then get on a plane to New Zealand, which will take me 25 hours. Can't you do this? He said, no, you just got to do this. You got a fax machine. So I can't tell you how long it took. She had 6 offices. But when I came back, my husband says, I saw Hillary Clinton on TV. I said, really? He said, yeah. She said all she used to drink all day was Diet Coke, but for some reason now she only drinks water. So she, they tried to stop me from faxing it because, and this is not political, I say, all the world leaders here in America are on aspartame, have been on aspartame. They took Reagan's life. Obama has been seen drinking it. I wrote Bush before he became president because he was drinking it. Now, they had this Dietetic Practice Act, which is a monopoly and against the state constitution. And he says, well, I don't agree with you. And he was drinking it. Dr. Roberts wrote a paper while he fainted. So you got all these leaders that are making decisions all over the world, and they're all using aspartame. And the politicians, when I testified before the New Mexico House and the Senate, we walked in there. I testified with Dr. Ken Stoller, who's a pediatrician, and just about every single person in the Senate was sitting there right in front of us, knowing what the meeting was about to ban aspartame in New Mexico, and they were all drinking Diet Coke. And so when Dr. Stoller got up to speak, he says, I don't think we're going to get anywhere, because he says, with all of you drinking Diet Coke, and he says, and he said, can you not at least have mercy on the children? And they didn't do anything. They had lobbyists around there and attorneys, and they just went nuts over the fact I was carrying Dr. Roberts' medical book wherever I went, and they knew that I would show that. So it changed the opinions of the people in the audience. And one of the senators, who was a diabetic, after she read what it does to diabetics, got off of it. But they wouldn't take it away from the kids. And that's evil. That's as evil as you get. We tried it in Hawaii, did the same thing. But, you would think...
Well, I wanted to ask you real quick, Dr. Betty, what do you think about this Zika virus?
Well, there have been at least 6 articles. Let me see if I've got this one in front of me that have been written. One from, I think Horowitz wrote one. Mike Adams wrote one. Go to Google and look up Zika. But I think one of them that wrote it wrote that, first of all, when they checked out, and it said there'd been 4,000 cases of, where the brain was, the baby was born with a small brain. Well,
yeah.
4,000 cases, it was 400. And that the Zika virus had been around for years and years and was a very mild form of the flu, but it was an excuse so they'd go make another vaccine or something like this. So I read all these different things because I didn't at the time have time to get into it, but I was putting together a lot of stuff to write about this CDC report about not drinking alcohol. In any event, out comes 2 days ago, here it is, I think, links to sex, birth defects grow. Okay, here it is. It was in the Zika virus, Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Wednesday, March the 9th. So that I guess this will be on Google. And I'm going to read you a little bit here. The agency also noted it was important to continue studying whether other factors could be responsible for the jump in microcephaly, that's small brains, and neurological problems, including whether several causes combined might be to blame. So in other words, this article is about that it's not just small brains, it's all kinds of birth defects, and they can't figure out why everybody's having children with birth defects. Well, I'll tell you what, if I just had to guess, I'd say 80% was aspartame.
Yeah, I thought the same thing. And you know, what I'm really seeing on the news and the Weather Channel is that they're really pushing that the virus is going to spread across the South this year because the mosquitoes have migrated into the U.S., and they're saying Texas, Louisiana, Alabama, Georgia, all along this, and Florida are the prime states for it. And what I feel is they're priming the people for the fear factor because they got that vaccine ready, and they're gonna cause it. I think they're gonna cause it by getting people to take the vaccine.
Well, not only that, you know, you can do this too. You know, you can get a Google alert on anything. Like I have a Google alert on aspartame. So if any article comes in or any new study, I'll automatically get it. So, in fact, I had to laugh. The last article I got from Google is one called Aspartame and ISIS. And I thought, my goodness, what a headline. I was reading it, and the common denominator was Don Rumsfeld talking about what he did in Iraq and then how he got aspartame approved and what caused ISIS and everything. It was a very interesting article. But anyway, my point is I also have a Google alert on FDA, and I just sit here with my hands over my head reading this thing about where the FDA says that genetically engineered mosquitoes, you know, are just fine, you know, that they're okay. In fact, I started to put it on the list, and I may still put it on the list so everybody can read it, which shows you, you know, it makes you think that if somebody said, hey, let's approve arsenic for lettuce, the FDA would do it because they've admitted that they can't do anything. And it's like Dr. Verrett, who testified, she was the FDA toxicologist, too, during the aspartame thing, that said it still wasn't safe in 87, and they were working up to a whitewash. And she said, you know, the FDA is known for years, the carcinogenic, the colors, brilliant blue, and, you know, red and whatnot. And she says until they are pushed up against the wall, they will not make change. So they're going to do anything that Monsanto, you know, and any of these companies and Pfizer, and, you know, if they say jump, it's just like someone told me that worked for Monsanto. They said, look, we run the FDA. When we say jump, they ask how high. So the FDA, and that's why Arthur Evangelista left. When I first met him, he had been working at the FDA for about 3 years. And, you know, I was really giving it to him about aspartame. He said, wait. He said, I left because of corruption. He said the FDA, he said that, you know, if industry did something wrong, they would change the report. And he left with the reports. In fact, I made copies of them, sent them to the media, and showed what the FDA was doing, and nobody published it. Not a one of them published it. But I tried to help him. He said, I simply could not see continued work for the FDA and watch them commit crimes. They serve above the law. So don't expect...
Okay, well, Dr. Betty, for those who are diabetic and don't know how to get off aspartame or what to use instead of aspartame, why don't you tell us what they should do?
Well, you know, you should go to the Just Like Sugar website and look at the, it's 5 minutes, the video, the Just Like Sugar story. I explained that to this man who was making, growing herbs for the pharmaceutical company until they started making all these dangerous drugs and he quit. And I told him what the problem is. Okay, we get a diabetic off of aspartame, and all their symptoms disappear, and their blood sugar is normal, and the doctor wants to know what they're doing because their blood work is normal. And the first question they're going to ask me is, then what do I use? And I said, there is nothing. I find something in everything. I said, even in stevia in Brazil, they add aspartame. And I said, the sulfate and potassium cause cancer and leukemia. I mean, what am I going to tell him? He said, I'll make you one. So, and I said, really? You know, this is what needs to be made, and this is why I say I have no financial association with them. But anyway, they did it, they said, for the good of the country, and that's why they got the award. But it's made out of chicory. Chicory has been used for 70 years to improve the health of diabetics. And it's also got orange peel in it from organic oranges, vitamin C from organic oranges, and calcium, and nothing else. There's nothing else in that product. There's no chemicals, and everything is organic. But it is particularly good for diabetics because of chicory. So I've noticed over the years that when we get people off of them, they say, what do we use? And I'll tell them to go to that website and read about it. A lot of them have written back and said, you know, this is interesting. I got off aspartame. My problems disappeared. I got on just like sugar. I go to the doctor, and he says, you're perfectly healthy. You never had diabetes in the beginning. It must have been from the aspartame. And so there is that safe thing. So then I says, okay, Mike, how in the world do you get those horrible diet drinks out of the schools? So they begin to make drinks. I don't know where they are in it, for kids that are made out of organic drinks, like organic strawberry drinks and organic orange drinks. And then we had the problem with the gun. The best thing that they make, I'll have to admit, is their hot chocolate that has nothing in it but dark chocolate and organic and organic vanilla bean and no chemicals, nothing. It tastes like chocolate did when I was a little girl. And every time I serve that to my guests, they keep asking for more and more and more. It's a great product. But anyway, you can go to that website, and I think they make cookies for diabetics. And I really don't know what all the stuff, but they've got it for baking because you can bake with it. And you put in your zip code, and it will tell you where you can buy it in your area. You may, live in some far-off area where there's not many stores, and if it's not right there in your area, you can buy it off the website. But you ought to see the list. They probably made a lot of things I don't even know about, but they were making they were going to make soda. Anyway, they sent me a sample, and I says, you mean to tell me this is made out of fiber and nothing bad? I says, could you just get this long cord and plug it into my kitchen? It was so good. But they make very, very good things, but they're all healthy. They're made out of fiber and organic foods, no chemicals. So they did that for me and our doctor so that when people say, what do? We can do it. And then Dr. Caldwell came along and said, okay. I had some doctors in Europe make an aspartame detox, which you'll see on our website. And then Dr. Blaylock wrote a paper, What to Do If You've Used Aspartame, which tells you, to avoid MSG, to avoid this, and what supplements to make sure that you use magnesium, make sure that you use taurine. And once you detox and get as much of the poison as you can out of your body, then the supplements will work better. And you have to use distilled water for a while because you don't want water with chlorine, and you don't want water with fluoride in it. And, and all these things interact. Dr. Blaylock also has some good books like Health and Nutrition to Save Your Life. And really some of the things that he tells you are things you wouldn't even know. For instance, I imagine how many people drink iced tea, and how do they serve iced tea? With a piece of lemon. But do you know that if you squeeze that lemon into your iced tea, that it multiplies the fluoride? Most people don't know that. And it tells you that if you're over 50, if you get your doctor to tell the anesthesiologist to put magnesium in the IV, it prevents the heart attacks and strokes people have, after surgery. And it will give you a lot of good information in that book. His main book is Excitotoxins, The Taste That Kills. And I sent him a note, and I said, would you please write a book for medical students, because they come out, they don't know about aspartame, they don't know about hyperbaric oxygen, they don't know about this. And I noticed when I was looking for a book on Amazon, he has written a new book, and you can get it for half price now because it won't be out till April. And it's called Prescriptions. I forgot the second word, and it's got 70 natural cures. I'm sure he's got aspartame in there. So that's something good to think about. But I definitely would get the aspartame disease ignored epidemic as long as you can get it, because if you have problems and you are diabetic, you can go into a doctor that doesn't even know about it and say, look, this is written by a diabetic specialist. Here's a whole thick 40-page chapter on how harmful aspartame is to the diabetic, and what to do about it, and about the other sweeteners, and why people have heart attacks, how it causes sudden cardiac death, that it causes an irregular heart rhythm, and it interacts with all cardiac medication, damages the cardiac conduction system, and causes sudden death. And all these people are dying, and they're dropping dead. Nobody knows why, and that's why, because it causes sudden cardiac death. It's killing people. It's poisoning people, and it's giving them methanol poisoning. And also, I also tell people, and I don't get any commission on books or anything, it's just that if you want to save somebody's life and it's somebody's anniversary, instead of buying them a sweater or a jacket, buy them a book on aspartame and save their life. Because the doctors are doing this because it's so hard to get these articles in medical journals because of the power of industry. And I think the British Medical Journal, the editor, wrote about that, and for the fraud in science and how they pay people to do articles to say they're safe. They got an organization, a front research organization called ILSI, Life Sciences, that they give money to universities, and if they won't say aspartame is safe, they don't get any money. And to show you the power they have, Dr. Safredi did his third study showing aspartame to be a multi-potential carcinogen. And so the next day, Harvard Hospital put out an article, and it says, well, we did the longest and the strongest study on aspartame, linking it to cancer. And would you believe, during the Twilight Zone, the very next day before the day was up, they apologized for publishing it after saying it was the strongest and the longest. They said it was weak, which means that industry got to them within 24 hours, and it was too late. They'd already published it, and they apologized for publishing it. And so I wrote an article that Harvard says they're sorry they told you aspartame was bad. But, that's what they do. And
we are coming up on the end of the show. We want to thank you again for your time and all your work and your information. And before you leave, real quick, why don't you give out your website where everyone can come and read all these wonderful articles and get the information?
Okay, my website is www.mpwhi.com. If you don't have a pencil and paper, just remember it stands for Mission Possible World Health International. The name is so long, we just use the initials, mpwhi.com. My email is Betty, BETTYM, 1919 at Mindspring, MINDSPRING.com. So, if you can't find something or, you have questions or you've been on aspartame or you need to know something about the sweeteners, but be sure you print out the aspartame resource guide because it's got other URL links in them, like maybe the FDA report, and you can forward it to other people or your friends and neighbors. and you can and it tells you how you can get that movie, Sweet Misery, A Poison World. It's good to show at your office, your church, your, whatever meetings you have. You might save a whole room full of people. I make it a habit. At least I save one person a day. But with nice people like you and big radio stations, you can save thousands or millions. So that's a good way for people to do it, is to show the movies, give out the flyers we have, look up. You can even Google aspartame and diabetes. You'll probably find many of our articles. Give it to a diabetic. That's the way to do it.
When I found you, I just Googled aspartame and Sweet Misery, and it pulled up your website.
Yeah. So somebody asked me, is that what you do 24 hours a day is just right? And I said, well, I'm always having to answer something. So, yes, I can't let anybody get away with thinking it's safe, when just being educated, could save their life and the lives of children.
Your information, Dr. Betty, should be in every gynecologist's waiting room.
Well, I tell you, that report for school should be in, it says give to your pediatrician, your gynecologist, and in one case, I got somebody off of it, and she was so upset. She said the nerve of this woman. She told me that it was my Diet Coke why I couldn't get pregnant because it's an endocrine disrupting drug. And he said, she didn't write this. Dr. Roberts wrote it. Wouldn't hurt. And so she got pregnant. When I met her, she said the doctor said it was a little girl, so instead of naming the baby, Robert, she named him Roberta. But she said the doctor said that there's a run on the name Roberta if he ever ran into me again. It was somebody I made put their Diet Coke back in the grocery store. But it was a fertility clinic, and he got everybody off aspartame, and everybody got pregnant. So, that's what it takes.
All we can do is educate everybody that we can get out there to, Dr. Betty.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for, dedicating your life to fighting this. You're a strong individual and a very, very blessed woman.
Well, I thank you, Mary, for forwarding the news on. You helped a lot of people. So thank you again, and
we'll have you back.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. God bless.